I have 3 little brothers, and so sometimes I think I've seen it all. I've helped them clean ice cream from behind their ears. I've let them play with my phone, only to have it returned covered with those greasy little boy fingerprints. I sit at dinner with them while they spill the contents of their plates all over me, but never themselves. Sometimes I come home, and I see something like this. And I think to myself, how does this happen? Is it because they're little kids? Because I was a little kid once, but I never made quite this mess. But I was a little girl. So in my head, I chalk it up to the fact that they're boys, and boys will be boys, and boys are bound to make messes. It's kind of the same logic that we see here. This is a tweet response to the Steubenville rape case. Guilty. I feel bad for the 2 young guys, Mays and Richmond. They did what most people in their situation would have done. The Steubenville rape case happened recently in Ohio, in which 2 teenage boys were found guilty with raping an incredibly intoxicated teenage girl. However, this person would argue that they didn't need to be found guilty because they weren't really at fault. They did what anyone would have done. This person isn't explicitly using the phrase boys will be boys, but they're using the same mentality. It's boys are drawn to destructive situations, harmful situations, and they will act upon that. So the same logic that they are using is the same logic that I use when I take my brothers to the playground and they immediately head to the muddiest spot to roll around. Now, boys will be boys is obviously just a colloquial phrase that we use today. It seems relatively innocent. In fact, as far as we know, the phrase first originated in 1589, and it was, children are children and do childish things. This makes sense. As I've said, I've seen children do very childish things. However, it has evolved into boys will be boys. And though we don't use that last part of the phrase anymore and do childish things, nor have we tacked on a congruent and do boyish things, that part of the phrase is still implied. We don't use it and do boyish things, but what would it mean if we did use it? Because that's the part of the phrase that really carries so much meaning. When my oldest brother made the Distinguished Honor Roll, no one was telling me what a shining example of boys will be boys he was. And when my male friend was the first violinist in the state orchestra, people weren't coming to our school and acclaiming how he was a perfect example of boys will be boys. However, when my best friend was unceremoniously dumped by a boy, the only thing we could think of to console her was that he was a boy, and of course he was going to do this. Boys will be boys. So what we can deduce from this is that when we use the phrase boys will be boys, what we're implying is that they're doing something harmful and destructive. And obviously this can have negative implications for both men and women. When you use this kind of a phrase to a guy, you're implying that you don't trust him, that they're not worthy of trust, that they will at some point mess up in their lives, and we're expecting it. When you use it to women, you're giving them an excuse. We're saying that a man is going to mess up, but it's okay because it's just in his nature. And obviously this isn't true. I chose to focus on the phrase, say, boys will be boys, but what I really hope to illustrate is just the larger mentality that we have, that men are drawn to these harmful, destructive situations, and we should expect it, and we should just let it go, because that isn't the case at all. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on men. I've spent some time trying to investigate the topic, and I have come up with no conclusive results. But this is what I have found, is that not all men are the same. In fact, the patterns of behavior that I have seen are so erratic that I couldn't even begin to make generalizations to group all men together. And so I think we're to a point where we don't need to be doing that anymore. We don't need to reclaim this phrase. We just need to get rid of this phrase and phrases like it altogether. And we don't need this mentality. Instead, we need the kind of mentality where when we come home and we see this, we think, how can I teach my child to be more respectful of their environment? And when the stakes are a little bit higher, like this, we won't think that this is inevitable or we can just let it go because it's in people's nature. Instead, we can hold each other accountable as people, men and women alike. Thank you.